You may have seen Quentin Tarantino's war film Inglorious Bastards, but an award-winning documentary aims to tell the true story of men who went behind enemy lines to fight the Nazis. Min Sook Lee is the director of the Real Inglorious Bastards. The film won a Canadian Screen Award this week for Best History Documentary. Lee is also a documentary media professor here at Ryerson. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
So, could you tell us a bit about your documentary and what drew you to the topic?
The documentary looks at Operation Greenup, which was a very little-known OSS operation comprised of 2 Jewish American refugees and 1 deserter from the German army. And what this team did was they went behind enemy lines. And they went into an area of Austria known as Tyrol, which was governed by this Governor Hofer, who was a rabid fanatic Nazi. And it was near the end of the war, and they snuck behind enemy lines and created havoc. The team leader, Fred, impersonated a Nazi officer, and they started sending intelligence back to the Allies. And the work that they did has been credited as probably shortening the war on the Italian front for at least 6 months, and also was recognized by William Casey, who's a former CIA director, as being the most successful OSS operation in Southern Europe.
I understand that, these characters have some pretty difficult things to tell in their stories. How did you manage to find them?
It was actually quite incredible. I was very lucky. 2 of the original members of Operation Greenup were alive when I started making this documentary. One of them is living in West Virginia, and that was Fred Mayer, who was the leader of the team, and he was the one who went behind enemy lines and basically passed himself off as a German officer. And you've got to remember, Fred was an 18-year-old Jewish refugee living in Brooklyn, New York. And there he is behind enemy lines and convincing other Nazi officers that he's one of them. So he was still alive in West Virginia when I started the documentary. And Hans Winberg, the radio operator, who hid in the attic of a farmhouse and started doing the Morse code and tapping the intelligence information that Fred had gathered, tapping it back to the Allies. He was also still alive, living in Amsterdam. So I was quite lucky that 2 of these extraordinary individuals were quite advanced in their age at the time, but they were alive to tell their story.
Now, what were some of the rewards of making this film?
I think one of the rewards is actually meeting the individuals who are responsible for rewriting history, who had the incredible courage and tenacity to take on actions during a time of extreme hardship because they believed in something larger than their lives. They believed in something that meant more to them than their own personal safety. And for me, I'm always interested in stories of resistance, of fighting back, of social change, and people who start taking the uncompromising road, I guess you could say. So to meet Fred Mayer, who's now 91 years old and living in West Virginia, he still volunteers every Monday for Meals on Wheels, and he's delivering food for people who can't get out. To meet him and to know what he was responsible for and what he had done, and to actually understand that people who are celebrated as heroes in textbooks or in larger-than-life legends and movies and such, what heroism looks like in the everyday encounter is actually what your neighbor looks like, what someone in your family looks like. It's not some epic comic book superhero. It's actually ordinary individuals who have heroism inside of them.
That's great. Thanks for telling me all of this, Min.
You're welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
No problem. The Real Inglorious Bastards was also nominated for Best Editing and Best Directing in a Documentary at the Canadian Screen Awards. You can find out more news on Ryersonian.ca. I'm Samantha for Ryersonian TV.